بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This week I have the pleasure of conversing with Dr. Will Caldwell. How are you, sir?
Alhamdulillah, doing well.
Alhamdulillah, very
glad
good.
to be here.
MashaAllah, good to have you, man, as always. The topic for this week is iniquity, which is one of those words we scarcely use outside of a literary context. You know, in fact, if somebody says iniquitous, I assume they're being humorous.
Yeah.
So bring that word closer. When you think iniquity, bring that a little closer. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right, because I was chuckling a little bit when I saw the topic, and I was like, this sounds juicy, you know, iniquity. The first thing I thought of was actually Pulp Fiction. Samuel L. Jackson, he's Ezekiel 25:17.
Yeah.
The iniquity of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men, which is a very violent scene in that movie, but it's kind of funny, you know.
Sure.
So I was planning to lean on the book quite a bit, but you know, I was reading over the passage, and he defined iniquity as harming others without cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, that still seems like very broad to me. So, you know, I was hoping one of the first things we could do is actually like define this word. The Arabic word is baghi, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let's just work on translating that a little further.
Baghi is a kind of harm that one creature perpetrates against another creature, but there's usually kind of a very distinct positionality. Right? So it's, you know, a ruler can be iniquitous.
Mm-hmm.
A mother can be iniquitous to her children. A husband can be iniquitous. An imam can be iniquitous. Right? So it's transgression, but it's transgression that's supported by some kind of hierarchical relationship between the two parties.
Okay, yeah. So you're doing it from a position of authority.
It's abuse from a position of authority. This is iniquity. Right?
That's interesting, because you know, I struggle with this sometimes in the Being Muslim class. Like how do I make this relevant to the people who are actually sitting in the room here with me? You know, if I had to venture a guess, I would bet we don't have too many iniquitous people in the room with us tonight. You know, like sometimes like we're going over stuff, and I'm thinking, you know, like we talk about sin, we talk about damaging character traits, things like that. And I'm thinking, you know, these people are sitting in a class on Islam on a Wednesday night. You know, they're probably pretty good people. Yeah. Like if I had to guess, you know, they're probably excellent people. So, you know, I would be curious to see where we could actually take this conversation.
Well, for me, deliberation on iniquity begins with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, كلكم راع وكلكم مسؤول على رعيته. All of you are leaders, and all of you will be held accountable for the way you led. Right? So in a sense, we all occupy positions of leadership, different kinds of leadership. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الذي رفع بعضكم فوق بعض درجات ليبلوكم فيما آتاكم. It is God who raised some of you above others in rank to test you in what he's given you. Now, one of the reasons we can't really appreciate the fullness of that verse is we tend to think about status either as a source of hierarchy, right? Like the workplace, this is my superior, I'm her subordinate, right? Or we think about it in terms of socioeconomic status. This person is wealthier than me, or this person has more money than me, etc., right? Authority is when you are in a position of advantage vis-a-vis the other person. So when I take my car to my auto mechanic and I give him my car because I hear some knocking, in that moment, he's in a position of authority over me. Because if he wants to abuse his power, it's very easy for him to do so, right? Even though I'm the client, you know, he's the proprietor, he's the vendor. But in that moment, he has all of the power. If he wants to come out and say, you need a new transmission, it's going to be $4,000. You know, we used to joke around that some auto mechanics were, we called them $2,000 auto mechanics, because no matter what the problem was, it was going to cost $2,000, right? Or we would say when he, you know, does the diagnostic, he gets on the phone with his wife and he says, how much is that fur coat you want?
Yeah.
3,000. Yeah, it's going to be about $3,000. You know what I'm saying? So in that, even though we wouldn't typically think that an auto mechanic could be iniquitous, or we wouldn't think that somebody preparing someone's food could be iniquitous, or we wouldn't think that people that we might see as they're not leaders, they don't have authority. No, they actually do have authority, right? We're constantly in positions of disadvantage and advantage in our worldly transactions all the time.
Well, that helps. I mean, that kind of like grounds it for me. So, you know, the first thing that came to my mind as you were describing that is my relationship with my sons, right? Which, you know, totally becomes clear, by the way. You always wondered before I got married, why is marriage half your deen? You find out because it's like the testing ground, like all the stuff that we talk about, like in purification, the heart. It's like, well, let's see if you can really do it. And like, you know, just recently with my oldest son, he's 5. And I'm usually pretty patient with him, pretty nurturing. But when I see him disrespect his mother, I tend to fly off the handle a little bit. And I saw that last week. And, you know, I just decided to like catch myself and like, I'm going to dig into this, figure out why he did it. I'm not gonna like, you know, just sort of straighten him out, which is the way I tend to like, you know, mollify my own feelings about what I'm doing. It's like, I'm going to straighten him out right now. Usually just end up like making him feel hurt. And, but, you know, I talked to him and I realized, oh, like he like perceived something that she did. And, you know, we were actually able to talk about it. And, you know, he realized like, oh, she wasn't doing this thing that I thought she was doing. And then he just went and apologized to her. And like, we were all happy at the end. But, you know, it made me realize like, I really could have done him wrong in that situation. And I have done him wrong probably in the past, just because I have this feeling, well, I'm going to straighten him out. And so like, you know, what's kind of unsettling to me about that is like the iniquity, my own iniquity in that moment, I could have felt completely justified in doing, you know, even if it sort of tears at my heart a little bit, you know, I pushed that aside. I'm like, no, I had to do it. You know, I couldn't let that slide. Right. But in fact, you know, I would have felt morally justified in my iniquity in that moment, which is a scary thing to think about.
Yeah, there was an 18th century Syrian scholar named Kawakibi. And he's looking at his contemporary Dar al-Islam, kind of just the Muslim world broadly. And he said, the biggest problem among the Muslims is istibdad, which is a word that means despotism or tyranny. And he said, it exists at every level of our society. This has become like a pathology, right? And this was in the 18th century.
Wow.
Right? This has become a pathology among Muslims. He said, everybody who is in a position of subordination to anyone else, will be made to feel the brunt of that subordination. He said, husbands treat their wives like this, and women treat their children like this, and employers treat their employees like this, and the governors treat the governed like this. Men treat women like this. The wealthy and landed treat the disenfranchised and poor like this. And he said, often when somebody is critiquing some aspect of societal injustice, they're just getting like a part of it. Like if you're just talking about misogyny, you're seeing something that's real. But like Shaykh Hawakibi was zooming out saying, but it's bigger than just men treating women like this. Right? That is only reflective of larger trends of tyranny and despotism and abuses of power in the society. And I remember, I actually didn't read the book. Dr. Sherman Jackson referred me to the quote. And then I read the book. And I was in Egypt around the time of the Arab Spring. You know, funny thing is, subhanAllah, I'm on the phone with Dr. Rami Nashishibi from Iman. And he said, are you going down to Tahrir? And I was like, hell no, I'm not going down there. I'm not going down to Tahrir. He said, you are an African American in Egypt at the time of this uprising. Man, you have to go down there, see what's happening so that you can document what's happening for posterity. This is for your memoirs. I was like, yeah, you're right, man. I went down, the authorities sprayed a canister of something. It made me itch terribly. I just started itching really, really badly. I said, okay, I got everything I need for my memoirs, man. You know, and I went back to my apartment in Muqattam. But when Hosni Mubarak, who was the soon to be deposed president, came on television, he was talking in this very paternalistic, almost, you know, I know you guys are a little upset about some things happening in Egypt, and I promise, you know, things will change, but I urge you, be calm, just relax. And I said, this is like an abusive father attempting to mollify or pacify people that he's been abusing for a very long time. And that quote of Shaykh Hawakibi came back to me that, man, this is a tendency that we see among Muslims, you know?
And I would bet that at some level, he really didn't get it.
No.
You know, like in the same way where I probably often felt justified, and here he is, you know, like the way I would deal with my son. Like he probably felt like whatever it is that they're demonstrating about is really, it's not all they're making it out to be. I'm not that bad of a leader. And, you know, he could probably give you a long list of like all the things that he had done for the Egyptian people.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So it kind of goes to show you like, what is, we have this label for it, like unjustly harming another. And yet we probably are incapable of seeing that harm oftentimes.
He says, its cause, the cause of iniquity, is the powerfully intoxicating wine, love of worldly position, hubb al-riyasa. So remember, if you wish to turn this intoxicant into useful vinegar, right? So he begins by saying the root cause of iniquity is love of leadership, that one is intoxicated by having a position of power over someone else. He says, but remember this, right? So he says, remember how detrimental abusing power can be to your spiritual standing if you want to use a position of advantage as something that will benefit you. What do you think?
I wonder if maybe we could both be a little bit vulnerable here. Because, I remember when I first started working here full time, and there was this back and forth that I had with Ali Dia, our ED, and other people on the team, because I would sign everything Will Caldwell. If I was giving the khutbah on a Friday, I would say, all right, put Will Caldwell on the advertisement. And they were saying, you need to start calling yourself Dr. Will Caldwell. Because, it sort of lends credibility to Ta'leef, and look, you earned the title, so like use it. And, for a number of personal reasons, I was hesitant. I really felt like, well, I didn't go into academia. It's an academic title. Like, I feel like I've moved past it in so many ways. But they convinced me to do it. I was just at home over the weekend, and I missed Juma. I left on a Friday, and I was really missing being at Juma. For one reason, I just enjoy coming here. I enjoy seeing my friends, but I have to be honest, a part of that was, people that I don't know come up to me and they say, "Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Caldwell. Nice to meet you. I saw your khutbah live streamed," or whatever. And that feels good.
Sure. Sure.
And people have been calling me Dr. Caldwell for well over a year now. I guess I've gotten used to it. And I realized, I was like, wow, something about this is really seeped into my heart. Where you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I do actually.
And it's even if you don't go in to a position of authority, not that I have much here at Ta'leef, but I do have some, not seeking that there's a way that you just really can't fully avoid that love of leadership that will just enter your heart.
It's interesting you say that, because Ibn Hazm, the famous Andalusian scholar, he said, the only thing that pushes a person to learn, to become knowledgeable, to become prominent in something, right? He was talking particularly about seeking religious knowledge, is that they don't want to be treated like a thing of no consequence. He was saying this is just a part of the fitrah. When I first embraced Islam, I saw the respect afforded to people that possess knowledge. Right? I saw the way that people were greeting them. I saw the way that people were anticipating their arrival. And this can be particularly pronounced among men, because men are very confrontational in my experience, and very kind of like the Prophet ﷺ said, "Nazzil an-nasa manazilahum," like putting everybody in their proper place. Even when we attempt a kind of egalitarian ethic, sometimes it's very difficult, right? There's there's alphas and betas and sigmas and all of that craziness, right? So part of me really wanted that for myself. I wanted to be someone that people were happy to see me. I wanted to be someone that people greeted very respectfully. I wanted to be someone that was very highly regarded in my community. And I remember when it all came into perspective for me. I was graduating in Azhar, and for the entire time, I had been propelled by this desire to be not famous, but to be seen as dignified, to be seen as worthy, to be seen as consequential, right, of significant in some way, right, to transcend obscurity, right? And I remember one of my teachers, maybe he could see this in me, because we were graduating and I was looking and he pointed to his headdress which is called a tarbush, right? The famous Azhari, it's a red fez, the tassel is like this. There's a white turban with no tail. This is called a tarbush. Somebody that wears it is mutatarbish. And he said, when you wear this, which for him was symbolic of being a religious scholar, he said, remember, he said, people will respect you without even knowing you. People will ask you crazy questions thinking that you can answer. He said, if you walk around Egypt long enough wearing this, people will come up to you like, Shaykh, I think my husband is possessed by a jinn. You know what I'm saying? Can you help me? You know what I'm saying? He said, but know that it's not you. You haven't even done anything. It is a kind of husn dhan. It is a good opinion that they have of the scholarship this represents because of the selfless service of all the people before you who wore this. And when you meet those people, you can behave in an entitled way. You can behave in a self-serving way. You can ingratiate your nafs through, trying to elicit some kind of deference from them, and you will destroy all of the respect and veneration that they have for this. Because in retrospect, and it always happens in retrospect, they will say, that guy from Azhar, what a selfish jerk. What an entitled loser. And then he said, the person that comes after you, that puts on the same headdress, it will mean nothing to them. And so,
that's profound.
It will mean nothing to them. And I remember saying to myself, I have to be committed to working on myself and really trying to the best of my ability to embody an ethic of service and community. Not wanting to be above or not wanting to be seen as being better than anyone. And if I fail to do that, then this privilege of being in this line of teachers that graduated from this institution, I have essentially belied. I have essentially dishonored, that privilege.
So how did you, how do you pull yourself back from that in those moments where you sort of feel yourself going a little off the rails?
Me? All I have to do is go home. Everybody's laughing because it's true. All I have to do is go home. Hadia's there. All I have to do is go home. She's there. And it's going to be a reminder of just how low my state is. And how low my rank is. I'll find out in about 45 minutes. In about 45 minutes, so I think I'll
refrain on commenting on that since my wife's in the back.
No, but in all seriousness, for me, it's always remembering that it has nothing to do with me. If people feel any respect, it's just the esteem they have for knowledge. Even when they call you doctor, it's the esteem they have for knowledge. And in some way, they associate you with that. I remember, I'll say this and I'll in America, the strongest nisbah or affiliation that we can have, even I think in a place that's ostensibly a meritocracy, even stronger than being from a certain family or is the school that you went to. People beam when you say, where did you do your undergrad? In Cambridge. They don't even want to say Harvard, right? They're already, they call it the Harvard card, right? And I remember listening to one scholar. He said, it's not important if you went through the university, but does the best of the university go through you? It's not important that you went through the University of Chicago. Does the University of Chicago go through you? Right? It's not important that you went to Yale. Does Yale go through you? It's not important that you went to Northwestern. Does Northwestern go through you? Because people haven't learned anything about you. They've never seen any of your work or your scholarship. It's just a good opinion that they have of the institution. And that's it.
Yeah.
And you're the beneficiary of that, and never forget that. Right?
I'm sorry for my kids, y'all.
No.
It's okay.
Alhamdulillah. 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 I mean, a place this big, how can you help? You know, you have to run around, man. Shouldn't I?
Alhamdulillah. Well, yeah, we'll continue, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
How are we doing?
Good, we're doing good.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah. So I think you know that's what I try to call to mind, that it has nothing to do with anything you personally have done. It has nothing to do with that. Right? Ironically, with every strong affiliation that we enjoy, whether it is to a university or a place, you have to recall somebody did something in the past that earned this place respect. You're just the person that's just kind of standing on their shoulders. You haven't
riding the wave.
You haven't done anything.
No.
Hey, what have you done? Nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Until you actually do something. And then the challenge becomes gratitude. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm distracted by my kids. I'm waiting for my youngest to tear something up, which is what he usually does at home. So.
Alhamdulillah.
Well, there he goes. That's a good start.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Now we're all looking at him. He doesn't even know. This is bliss. You almost have to let this this is bliss. You have to let it go. Look, he came, made a seat, sat on it, came next to Sanya, said, Salam alaikum. Do you like this? I like it too. That's my dad up there. Let's keep going. You know what I'm saying? Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. But so how do you pull yourself back from that?
Well, I think it's similar to what you mentioned. You know, I think if people knew what went into getting a doctorate, they would probably think I'm far more boring than they do otherwise, you know.
Well, you're not boring, but you know, mashallah.
Well, you know, I think the work is like much of the time. It's really just, you know, it's a lot of, you know, just sitting by yourself. Like, doctor sounds so great. Like, just call someone doctor. It sounds grandiose. Sounds like you've really like gone out and accomplished something. I stayed in and, you know, wrote a long paper. You know,
I don't think it's that simple, but I know what you're attempting to express.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier that I really still to this day, I remember being impressed by this about Muslims when I first embraced Islam, and I still am, that, you know, we are a community of people who really honor those who have knowledge. That's not normal in this society. No. And I think we should definitely appreciate that quite a bit, that people of learning are respected and valued in our community, like to have any sort of title whatsoever that suggests that you are a person of learning. I mean, you're right. Like, even when I walk into spaces where I don't know anyone and I'm introduced to people, there is sort of like this respect that's given to me, even though I've done nothing for these people. I've done nothing for their institution. And that's a really special thing, because I think we live in a profoundly anti-intellectual society, and people make fun of PhD students,
Sure,
know,
yeah.
a lot.
Yeah.
Much of it deserved, but to have a community where that's actually valued is a profound thing. I think to maybe like bring it back around to the topic of iniquity, we need to realize that like whenever honor is given, that sort of hierarchy that you mentioned earlier, that's created, right? And so the possibility of some form of iniquity arises. It becomes possible. And so we sort of have to be aware of that and know how to guard ourselves against that. Because I promise you, like that, sometimes I think I could walk into, like when I do a wedding, for example, I did a wedding maybe a month ago.
Alhamdulillah.
And it's always a huge honor to be asked. But, I come in, I'm meeting these two families that I don't know, and I'm being introduced as Dr. Will Caldwell. And I think, I could get up there and do something crazy. I could say something wild. I could, I don't want to think about the extent of things I could do, and people would still sort of let me slide because I'm a doctor. So, I think we have to realize that, again, I'm trying to like bring it full circle here, that when those hierarchies are established, because we do value knowledge, and that's a good thing, it creates the possibility for those that we esteem to be iniquitous.
Yes, yes. He continues, how many a leader achieved his heart's desire of rank and position, yet in the end, the devotee and his object of devotion were leveled to equal planes by death. So he's offering a very grave referendum on iniquity, saying, if you think that some worldly position gives you the right to mistreat somebody, know that your rank and their rank will be the same when you meet God. Right? There is no positionality in death. This woman, this man that you thought you could mistreat because you were socially more prominent or seemingly more significant, or in death, you will be the same. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-dhulm dhulumat yawm al-qiyamah," that oppression will be darkness when we meet God. And if there is one thing that you want to meet God with your soul absolutely free of, it's oppression. You don't want to oppress anyone. You don't want to mistreat anyone. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi." The Muslim is the one from whom other Muslims are safe from their tongue and hand. So, if you think, yeah, I'm over this person, in a sense, I have a right to do this to them, right? It's only right that I exploit this person. It's only right that I take advantage of them. And you see a lot of this, to my mind, in employer-employee relationships. So the idea that as the business owner, I'm making, who knows what I'm making, and maybe I'm not even paying my employees a living wage. The idea that, well, I can set the price that I want to compensate at whatever I want. It's my business. As long as it adheres to, mandatory minimums, and it's my business. Be careful. Be careful. And know that your rank and the rank of the individual in your employ will be the same when you meet Allah. Right? Aisha radiallahu anha, commenting about the character of the Prophet ﷺ, she said he never struck a child, he never struck a servant, he never struck a woman, he never struck an animal, he never struck another man except fighting in the path of Allah. So he very much lived by that ethic of, I am someone from whom people are safe from my tongue and from my hand.
Mhm.
But you know, sometimes so much is made of worldly status, right? This is how the bosses, you know, are entitled to behave, right? That, you know, we need to sometimes remind each other that yes, you might enjoy some worldly status or privilege or rank or position, but brother, it's not permanent.
Mhm.
It's not permanent,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, you know, the idea of death as the great leveler of all people is poignant for me right now. When I went home over the weekend, it was to visit my aunt who was on her deathbed. And she was the first of her brothers and sisters to pass away. And I think part of the shock that my mom and my aunts and uncles were feeling was she was the one that, like, if you thought any of them were like ever just like gonna live forever, it would have been her. You know, like, I'm from Georgia. My mom comes from like a very small, like, rural town. And you know, some of her brothers and sisters stayed close to that rural town. Others, you know, went like 90 miles down the road, and that was considered a big deal. My aunt went out and traveled the world. You know, she worked at Coca-Cola.
Vivacious.
And, yeah, you know, and she was, whenever you met her, she was just like full of like life and energy. Beautiful woman, mashallah. Allah rest her. I think the shocking thing about seeing her on her deathbed was just like watching this woman who, like, you know, had lived this life that was, you know, so full and, you know, so energetic. To, you know, she had a degenerative disease, and she was about 80 pounds when she passed. To see her taken into that state, I think was would be jarring in any case, but to see her taken into that state is, I think, you know, for my mother and her siblings was, you know, it caught them off guard. And not that this necessarily ties to iniquity, but in terms of like how just the remembrance of death sort of cures like all diseases of the heart. I think he actually says that at some point in the book, like, remember death, and you know, you'll straighten out pretty quickly.
No, but remembering death is directly connected to iniquity. Because iniquity, he says, the root cause is love of leadership. So it's, you know, someone that, the word we used to use is like, they like to lord over someone else, right? If you recognize that the person you're mistreating and you will be absolutely equal in death, right? You don't, you know, some of that entitlement begins to shrink. Like, who are you? It's like, okay, maybe someone comes and they are your housekeeper, right? And they're doing you the service and the favor of cleaning your home for a price. And maybe they miss a spot, or they do something, they forget to do something that you asked. And maybe you would ordinarily yell and holler, and because you're in the position of the person paying you, this is, you know, if once you remember that, you know, this arbitrary distinction between you and this person, it will end in death. Trust me. You know, and that reminds me, subhanallah, you know, I've often thought about raising my children overseas, right? But the one thing that scares me is I worry that if I raise them abroad, they won't really be connected to kind of a certain subjectivity that home produces. So I remember being in Egypt, African-American expat family, doing well, doing like some offshore business stuff. And as is common, they have kind of a robust service economy in Egypt. So it's, it's not like unusual for people to, have domestic help. That in America we would think only somebody very wealthy would have like a live-in, person, a butler or a maid or. But this is actually quite common in Egypt. In Egypt, you see people in the back of like Honda Accords with chauffeurs. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and he's sitting back there with reading his newspaper and everything. I'm like, it's a Honda Accord, man. He's driver to the office, right? So it's very, very common. And so this African-American family had a Sudanese woman working as a housekeeper. And I came in, I greeted everybody, and then I greeted her, and I started talking to her and catching up. How are you? How's your family? How have things been? And his son said, Dad, why is he talking to her? And I looked at him, because she is us. What are you talking about? I said, your son doesn't know that much about who we are as a people, as African Americans? Dad, why is he talking to her? Because that's me. That's my grandmother, right? That once had to clean folks' homes so that we could survive, right? So when you kind of recognize that a lot of these distinctions are just the vicissitudes of fate, right? Allah says, the alternating fates of being in positions of advantage and disadvantage, we give these to people in turn. You don't feel this sick kind of, it's like, bro, not only could it be me, it was me. Was me. So how dare you treat someone like that with disrespect? How dare you behave iniquitously? It was me. Could be me. In certain contexts, it is you. You'd be surprised that.
Or could be in the future.
Or could be in the future. So you have this one person, and that's when it becomes cyclical, because this person is being treated like crap by their boss. And then the person that works for them, they treat them like crap. See, that's what Imam Kawakibi was talking about. So when he's treating the housekeeper in this way, he goes to work and he gets treated that way. And you would think that this would encourage you to greater empathy, because like, I know what it is for someone to have a position of authority or advantage over someone else.
I'm almost starting to think about what Imam Kawakibi said about despotism being just pervasive, right? It almost reminds me of like intergenerational trauma, right? Like you get hurt as a child, you go on to hurt your children in exactly the same ways. Unless, you make the conscious decision at some point, I'm going to break this cycle. Absolutely. Right? Like, so my boss is a complete tyrant with me. I am not going to go home and be a tyrant with my family, right? Like I'm going to break that so that they get to see what an actual like equitable relationship looks like. And then maybe they can start to reproduce that in their own lives. Beautiful. Right? It's hard. It's really hard. Like the number of times I've caught myself just like with my father's words coming out of my mouth. In good scenarios and bad scenarios. Sure. I have a good relationship with my father. It's not like a bad thing, but it's.
And I've met your father. He's a very gentle man, mashallah.
Mashallah. Yeah. But it's profound, like how much of like our own words, our own thoughts even are not our own, right? And actually being conscious and not just like letting these things just jump out of our subconscious like into our relationships is a very difficult thing to do.
Absolutely.
So whether we're talking about families or we're talking about like these greater like social phenomena, like it takes a lot of work. And I think that when it comes to like dealing with iniquity, right? How do we actually stop it? Well, like start as close to home as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right. And see how that starts to ripple out. right? Because I mean, you have to imagine someone who experiences like a loving, caring relationship, they will experience iniquity from someone else. Somewhere else in their lives, they will experience some form of iniquity. And, not only will they realize that like, that's not like they'll have something to compare it to.
That's not right.
Right?
That doesn't, that's not
Yeah.
what an equitable relationship feels like. And they'll know.
Yeah.
One of the biggest and craziest correlations I've ever seen in my work, and mashallah, I've toured a lot of college campuses. I've worked with a lot of young Muslims, and this is a correlation that I can almost like pinpoint. A lot of people that grow disaffected with Islam, the common experience, tyrannical fathers, abusive fathers, across race, across ethnicity. When you really kind of get beyond the surface and you ask, when did you really kind of lose your feeling for Islam? It's usually about the teenage years. And when you ask, what was going on at that time, very rarely is it just theological, intellectual, philosophical. Sometimes it has some scaffolding. That's like, I started reading Voltaire and then, you know what I'm saying? But in the background, there's usually, and my father, not the mother. My father was a controlling, abusive, tyrannical, fake, sanctimoniously pious man.
We're still doing good.
Mashallah. He said, great. He said, great job.
Great job. Mashallah.
Great job. Alhamdulillah. My father was a fake, sanctimoniously pious, abusive man. And what I think happens is that if you begin to conceive, and this is kind of Freudian, right? But if you conceive of authority in that way, you end up conceiving of God in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If you think what it means to have power is to be like a tyrannical abuser like my father, then who's the ultimate power?
Yeah, God's just a bigger, badder version.
God is just the bigger, badder version. And one is quick, one that has the gumption to do so is quick to jettison such belief. I don't believe in that anymore. And they feel liberated. You say, well, how do you feel now? I feel liberated. I feel free. And I'm thinking, subhanAllah, without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I would feel scared. I would feel endangered. I would feel adrift, lost, aimless. But you're telling me, free of your belief, you feel liberated. I feel free. Whenever I hear that, I think, well, what was your belief in God to you? God was some angry watcher, vengeful and quick to retribution, and you're describing your father.
I forget what I was listening to, but it was like a podcast on behavior, and just how much of our behavior comes from these subconscious places. Deeply conditioned things like our relationship with our father, for example. And the way that we actually get past just like going through life in this sort of like mechanistic way where we're just reacting to our past traumas, our past experiences, whatever, is he was saying, ask yourself why 5 times. Why do you have this opinion of this thing? And you give an answer and you say, okay, why do you think that? Then you have another answer. You want to get 5 levels deep on that. And, just like from doing this work, I can totally confirm what you're saying. Like, I was talking to 2 brothers, actually. This was like a year ago. Their mother was like, you have to talk to my sons. Like they said that they're atheists and I don't know what to do with them. I don't know where this came from. And, so I was talking to them. And, I was like, okay, so, you decided you don't believe in God anymore. Why? And they were like, well, like we were reading this, like you talk about the intellectual scaffolding. I forget who they read. It was maybe like Dawkins or something.
Dawkins,
So something like
God
that.
delusion or something
Yeah.
like that.
And I was like, okay. So we talked about that. We talked about Dawkins for a while. I said, why did that resonate with you? And, they had to think about it, and they gave me an answer. But because I was like, look, I know I've read Dawkins before.
Mhm.
Didn't really do much for me.
No.
Right. So like what we need to get to here is like why Dawkins was so compelling for me. Dawkins is like one of these new atheist writers, for those of you who don't know.
Hitchens, Dawkins,
Yeah.
Dene. Right.
Yeah. So, there's an emotional resonance in these things that when we dig into them, when we ask why 5 times, we really get at like the root of like why we do a lot of the stuff that we do.
The timing was beautiful,
Yeah.
baby. You said why? He just came out. MashaAllah.
But yeah, I think this is true here. Like, why are we iniquitous with people? Like, right? Ask yourself why 5 times. Get to the root of it. Probably the answer is someone was iniquitous with you. At some point.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. SubhanAllah. He continues, keep in mind that this desire, right, for leadership is about turning away from God towards his impoverished and miserly servants. Concern with the affections of others is exhausting, and though you may please one, others will flee from you, filled with anger. What do you think about that?
It's a hard thing to do. That's what I think about it. Of course, like we claim to believe this, right? I think even for myself, like this is something where like, if you were to judge me by my actions, like it would fall far short of what I say I believe in. Like, yes, God is the creator. He's the sustainer. Nothing happens except by his will. Yeah, I believe that, right? I still go out and chase the dunya every single day, right? I turn to the creation as if it will actually provide for me. And I'm not talking about like, oh, the ideal here is just lay back and like wait for money to come your way, wait for whatever it is you're looking for, and you're like a wife, a husband, whatever, I'm not saying that, but like I engage in the world in a way where, like, if I'm honest with myself, I actually expect that like what I get out of it will be the result of my own actions, my own effort is what's going to get me there. So I mean, what he's saying is one of those things that makes perfect sense. It's like, yeah, superficially, yeah, I agree with this. What a hard thing to actually put into practice though.
I think what Imam Al-Mawlūd means in these lines is that through this position of leadership, and especially an arrogant abuse of your power as a leader, you aim to be esteemed by someone, right? This is a show of power. This is a show of authority for someone. But if it's not rooted in service and righteousness, it's certainly not for God, right? It's not for God. So I think what he's saying is like, who are you? Whose approval or whose esteem are you really after? Because there is no way God is pleased with that. For you to treat people in that way, for you to abuse people in that way, there's no way this is pleasing to Allah. So who are you trying to please?
Well, and I would wonder, like, are we in a sense trying, when we are being iniquitous with someone, like, are we trying to extract honor from them? Are we seeking their approval in some way? It's like, I have to lord over you in order for you to like respect me. Like that's just my assumption. Like when I do these things, which is completely contradictory to like this image of honor that you're trying to build yourself.
Absolutely.
You know, like
That's what he's gonna say too.
yeah, I mean, it's like when you sit down and think about it, it's like the whole process of being iniquitous completely belies itself.
Absolutely.
Right?
People won't, they'll never respect you.
I mean, you're putting those people above you in the sense that you're like, I have to get this honor and I have to get this position over you. You're placing them in a sense like above yourself.
Absolutely. And it never results in its aim, right? The intention of iniquity is never realized. Everybody hates a tyrant, right? You cannot coerce or compel respect. You can compel compliance. You know, you can compel, one to, adhere to some outward gestures of respect, but inwardly they despise you, right? Even if they say, oh, here's the boss, here's the big shot, and they stand it, there he is, but inwardly they think, I can't stand this jerk. I hate him. He really gets on my nerves. So even the honor, the deference that the iniquitous one feels from the person they're dominating, it's not even real. It's really just an expression of maybe their fear, right? Maybe they don't, they fear the negative consequence of telling the truth about how they feel about you. But it's not real respect, right? A man that beats his wife cannot elicit any respect from her. Maybe she's afraid. Maybe because she's afraid, you tripping now, man. You're in a good mood since Mina came back, huh? Alhamdulillah. Oh, she didn't hear me say that. You're in a great mood now, man, mashallah. But, so he ends, he says, yet what is prohibited regarding the pleasure of others is what is procured by way of trickery, ostentatious display of religiosity, or hypocritical affectation. Know also that the seeker of their pleasure cannot expect the pleasure of God, the fashioner of creation, the mighty, the capable. As for the one whose heart is encrusted with the love of this world, his only cure is having certainty of his mortality. Thus, if he keeps death constantly before his eyes, this acts as a cleanser for the soiled matter encrusting his heart. Right? And this is how he ends. When we think about love of the dunya, there's a tendency to only relate that to worldly things like money and jewelry and possessions, and no, love of praise, love of adulation. This is also a kind of hibbut dunya. This is a kind of love of the dunya. I remember I was backstage preparing to go on stage, and one scholar kind of looked out there at the stage, at the crowd, and he said, if you ever look at the audience and think about what applause lines you're going to use to draw applause from them, that's called hibbut dunya. That's called love of the dunya. Now, if your intent is, I want to use an icebreaker, I want to kind of, warm things up a little bit, but when you are speaking, not to impart anything, but just to elicit praise, just to elicit adulation. He said it's a kind of hibbut dunya, and it's demagoguery in some cases. Like this is what you want, just to look out there and say, what can I say that will make the people clap? What can I say that will maybe draw a standing ovation? It's a kind of hibbut dunya. And it was the first time that I thought, subhanAllah, when I think about love of the dunya, I think like cars, money, homes, jewelry, but no, that's a kind of hibbud dunya. And the danger with hibbud dunya is that if you love something more than you love Allah, maybe Allah Ta'ala will give you that thing that you love, but you'll never have Him. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to open the floor for some questions, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
So I was wondering if you can talk more, Brother Will, about you talked a little bit about pain suffered as children. And as an adult, I see, also in young adults, middle-aged adults, you talked about breaking the cycle. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't fit totally into the topic that we were covering tonight, but I'd like to hear more about that. How that cycle gets broken and what happens when it doesn't get broken. And it's just, can it just be internalized and you just live with it, or what?
Well, I wouldn't place a good judgment on this, but certainly it can just be lived with. I think, if anything, that's what these cycles show us, is that people do just live with it, even though they're destructive. I think this applies to iniquity, this applies to trauma, this applies to anything that really we do on autopilot. And this isn't to say that everything we do on autopilot is bad. There's a lot of good, those things that we are masters of are really the things like driving, for example. We all drive every day. When I drive back home, when I get home, I probably won't be able to, tell you any details about my drive home, right? Because I'm so used to driving that I don't have to think about it.
Even though it's a highly technical activity.
Yeah. There's this video of Roger Federer. He's a tennis player. And there's this video where he says, there's some fans there with him. And he's like, go stand across the room and put this can on top of your head. I'm going to knock it off with a tennis ball. And they go across the room. He throws the tennis ball up, whacks it, knocks the can straight off of their head. I mean, that is something that we would say, what a master of tennis. But I guarantee you, if he was sitting there thinking, okay, I'm going to toss the ball up and I'm going to wait for it to get right here, and then he probably would have smacked the person in the face, or the ball just would have gone in some random direction, right? I'm not saying that these cycles are necessarily bad things. They're part of what makes us human. But when we are engaged in cycles that we recognize as being traumatic, right? There are ways that I treat people that, after the situation ends, after I treated someone poorly, I feel bad afterwards. And, I look back and I'm like, what happened? It's almost like it all happened so fast. And, 9 times out of 10, what's happened is I went on autopilot. There was some learned behavior that was deeply ingrained in me at some point that I just repeated, because that's what I learned to do in that situation. And so that's where the 5 whys come in. Why did I do that? And you provide an answer to that question. You say, well, why did I feel that way? Or what brought up that emotion or that memory in that moment, right? Whatever the case may be. And you just keep digging. And usually you can sort of get to the root, or something very close to the root of what actually puts you in that autopilot state, where you didn't consciously decide to mistreat someone, but you did. I think when we have those sorts of interactions in our lives, that is a destructive cycle that we can break, right? But we have to get better at identifying it. And I think, what that sort of exercise does is, next time you're about to go on autopilot, you have a conscious thought, right? You have a conscious thought and you're like, wait a minute, I'm having this memory or this emotion that usually leads me to act in this certain way. Let me pause. It's exactly what happened with my son, which I mentioned at the beginning of the class. If I ever disrespected my mother growing up, I did not want to see my father after that. I used to hide. I used to like go and hang out with my friends, and inevitably I'd have to come back home and face him. And my father would just, that was just one thing he didn't tolerate, right? And I grew up in the South. I got the belt for things like that. So that is something that with my own son, I see him disrespect his mother. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to take my belt off, but you're not going to have a good time for the next 15 minutes or so, right? And that was something that I knowing him, actually for me that actually worked pretty well.
Wow.
Certain forms of discipline I think work differently for different people.
Yeah, but for me, man, if my mother just said the word belt, that's all it took.
You're mouthing off and she says belt.
She says, do I need to get my belt? No.
Yeah. But like I would notice after those interactions with my son, I would feel bad. I wouldn't feel like I had actually helped the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is for his personality type, that type of thing, just it pushes him farther into his feelings, and it doesn't resolve anything for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that from him, So like there came a time where I just had to say, I've got to do something different. And so, I saw him disrespect his mother, and I was literally, I was about to go there.
Yeah, second off of him, right?
And I saw him starting to like recede into himself. I don't know how to describe that, but I could see it happening. And I was like, okay, let's pause. And like that was one moment where I broke the cycle. It may happen again where like I don't break the cycle, right? But like we have to just take something that's sort of subconscious and make it conscious in those moments. That's what I'm talking about. Is that helpful? Okay.
On the like subject of cycles and sort of trying to solve the issue, once we realize that our actions are the result of the iniquity that we faced in the past, right? Like whether that be another person that caused the behavior in us, or like whether that be our parents, like how do you avoid resentment toward the person who continued the cycle in you? Because I feel like one of the goals of ihsan is to have like mercy, even like toward the person who is providing the tyranny. And once we start to solve this problem and realize, oh, this is the person that started the behavior in me, like how do you stop the resentment? Because I feel like those negative feelings can also have an effect on you.
Bismillah. Very, very difficult question. I think the forgiveness must first start with yourself, because often the subtext of being mistreated by someone is that there's something about me that I suppose warrants this mistreatment. And sometimes you arrive at that conclusion, and it's not like this emotional thing. It's just like a really practical thing. Like, if kids in my class bully me, then maybe I'm left to think, if only I was cooler, or I was stronger, I was a better fighter, or if only I was more aggressive, or there's something about me that lends itself to this kind of abuse, to this kind of iniquity. I think you have to first get to a place of kind of like holding yourself with some love and some mercy. And say, man, there's nothing about me that warrants being picked on, or warrants being bullied, or warrants being beat up. There's actually nothing about me that would make me the obvious choice for someone to mistreat me. And I think that once you see that, man, this is a problem that the other person has, this is something with which they are struggling, this is perhaps something with which they are afflicted, then I think it becomes easier to forgive them, right? Because you don't you've in a sense forgiven yourself, and you see that person as a person with a problem. I mean, something is wrong with you that you felt the need to treat me that way. Something is wrong with you that you thought that was okay, but nothing is wrong with me. Not like categorically, nothing is wrong with me, but I didn't do anything to deserve to be choked or beat up or slapped or verbally abused, or I didn't do anything to warrant that, right? But you have a problem. And I think that if you're on the other side of that, and I've been on both sides, I think recognizing that, you know what, the problem is not anything in them. The problem is in me. Right? It's not that they did anything, or, kids like that. When we used to, when I was in middle school and part of high school, we would pick on certain kids, man. It's hard to imagine me picking on anybody now. Probably look at me and think he got picked on, but I didn't always wear these little turtlenecks and stuff like that, man. Ask, we used to pick on certain kids. And one of them I ran into downtown. And even though, it was, 20 years ago, there was still like this thing, like, I remember how cruel you used to be. And I'm just like, man, I was wrong. I apologize. And really, I was in a lot of pain. I had a lot of stuff going on at home. I was living with my grandfather. He was having some issues with substance abuse, and it was tough, man. It was tough. And some of that was being expressed with the way that I treated my classmates at school. But it was nothing about you. It wasn't like you were like a person that, I was supposed to do that too, or this is just how it was. And I saw that as the beginning of him really letting a lot of that go, man. Now when I told him, he said, "What are you up to now?" I said, I'm a Muslim preacher. He said, "Get the hell out of here." Get the hell out of here. I said, "No, seriously, I am." You know what I'm saying? So I think it's kind of embracing that entire process. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think, the importance of forgiving yourself first, because if you can forgive yourself in these things, it becomes very easy to forgive the people who hurt you in the first place. But you have to forgive yourself, because the thing about resentment is it's not like this thing happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's that you've been carrying it for 10 or 20 years.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's why you feel resentment. It's like, you did this thing to me 20 years ago, and I've been carrying it around the whole time. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to forgive yourself in those situations, because you're like, this has almost become a part of me. I've allowed this to become a part of me. Mm-hmm. And, if I let go of it, it feels like you're letting go of your own identity in some way. This pain that you've carried with you has become a part of you. Mm-hmm. And you're responsible for that. And you have to forgive yourself for that, which is very, very difficult. But if you can do that, what they actually did to you all that time ago, that's tiny by comparison, mm-hmm. right? Like that was like something that probably happened in a moment, or like a 5-minute period. Compared to that 10, 20 years, it's nothing, So yeah, forgiving yourself is the hardest part, but that's the place to start.
Inequity sounds to be closely tied with a disconnect between not only knowing what is pleasing and displeasing to Allah, but more importantly, how His pleasure or displeasure is practically approached in how we make choices. Can you discuss how cultivating a love for His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam will allow us to identify tools that will help cultivate a sense of taqwa that help guard us against being iniquitous to not only others, but more important to ourselves? Jazakallah khairan.
You want to speak to Riku? Or you got your hands full?
No, I'll try. One of the most profound things to me about the Sunnah is that it really it has a way of checking your assumptions, right? Like about anything, like what it means to be a father, what it means to be a businessman or a leader, what have you. You know, the story I love that sort of illustrates this point is, you know, when the son of the Prophet Ibrahim, radiallahu anhu, when he passed away, and they were burying Ibrahim, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was crying, and his companions asked him, like, "Why are you crying, O Messenger of Allah?" And he said, "These are the tears of a lover for his beloved." Right? And like you get the sense from like the companion's question, it's like, you're a man of faith, like you believe in Allah, you believe that you know, you'll see Ibrahim again. Like, why the tears? As if like the tears were some sign of like a deficiency in faith. And so they had this question, like, we thought faith meant this, but we see you doing it, so explain that to us, please. And he's saying, these are just the tears of a lover for his beloved.
Allah.
Right? You can have faith and mourn those that you lose, right? Like you see that throughout the Sunnah, like, and whatever like your sort of misperceptions about what it means to be religious or a good friend or whatever, like the Sunnah will straighten you out on those things. And so like for me, you know, I mentioned that I think probably a lot of people who are iniquitous don't know that they're being iniquitous, right? Like that was a big burden that, you know, the first time I heard that like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I forget the companion's name, but he was a young boy. He was like
Anas.
Anas, yes.
Anas.
He was like a servant in the Prophet's house, and that he never so much as like showed any displeasure toward it. That he didn't say uff to me, and I thought,
I got a long way to go.
Boy. I do a lot more than say off to my kids. So like, you know, that checks an assumption, checks assumptions about, you know, how I was raised, what I thought I knew parenting to be, what I thought I knew, you know, being a leader to be. That's a very difficult standard to live to. But if I didn't have that, I would not have known that I needed to live up to something like that.
Beautiful. You know, when they talk about that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that's narrated by Anas, there's different explanations of the hadith. Some people say the Prophet ﷺ was preparing him for leadership, showing him how to lead, right? That Anas said, I never did anything, to which he said, why did you do that? And I never neglected anything that he said, why didn't you do that? And then some people say, no, the meaning is even more profound. It's because everything that happened, he understood it as the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So why be displeased with it? Right? The Prophet ﷺ would try to see the bright side and try to learn from it. Right? Because he saw God in everything. And, you know, as a father, that's very difficult to see even the grief my children give me as the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qadr Allah ma sha'a fa'ala. What am I? This is what Allah wants. What am I going to say? This is what Allah wants. What am I going to say? Maybe I do want children that are just, you know, very, very self-regulating, and they just come in to Tetleaf, and they just, because if my kids were here, it would be a battle royale. Najashi can give anybody a run for his money.
I can testify.
Yeah, anybody. When you talk about, you know, just being active, and I mean, my son, he's nonstop, mashallah, nonstop. And I love him. But whenever I feel frustration, I think about that hadith and I try to recall, this is what Allah wants. This is what, you know, I could have, you know, a child that was very calm and didn't have Najashi's kind of kinetic, you know, kind of pace, but Allah wants something different.
Yeah.
You know, Allah knows best and we know less. MashaAllah.
We have a sister saying, I am a divorced Muslim woman and experience inequity.
Iniquity.
Firsthand from my ex-husband as I was in an abusive marriage. You spoke about liberation from people who disassociate from Islam due to tyrannical fathers. My view of marriage now is my view of marriage now is entirely different, and I feel liberated from having removed myself from the marriage. I never doubted my faith or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I do doubt Muslim men and their intentions, and I am fearful of getting remarried. Not because I think I will face the same oppression, but that I will face any type of oppression. What are your thoughts on this for me and other women in similar situations?
La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.
Was sorry, the last part of that question was not because I'm afraid that I'll face the same oppression, but that I will face any type of oppression. Was that correct? Okay. Bismillah. Mhm.
Dr. Caldwell.
Gonna pass it to me, huh? Well, I want to start by acknowledging your pain, acknowledging your suffering, and really like acknowledging your intuitions, right? Because you are not incorrect that this is a problem. I was shocked when I first started working at Tatlif and put myself in a position where I sort of got exposed to the community's dirty laundry, like how much iniquity exists in our community. I mean, it's real. It's absolutely real. And you should never doubt your own experiences, and especially when you have gained a keen sense of sort of the fragility of relationships like marriages. Don't doubt your intuitions. That's all perfectly valid. I mean, what could I possibly say to make any of that better? I don't know. I do know that there are good men out there. I have the privilege of knowing many. And I hope that, as you are moving forward out of this marriage that was destructive and harmful to you, that part of the healing process will be the ability to trust again, to love again, but with a new form of wisdom that I'm sure you've gained from your experiences. The protections that ought to be afforded in a marriage really are a communal responsibility, whether that is coming from a wider family context, or in the case of many of the brothers and sisters who come through our community, they don't have Muslim families that are or families at all that are involved in their marriages to hold everyone accountable. And I would say, please just make sure that you have people standing behind you, inshallah, the next time around. Don't go it alone, right? And know that there are people here in this community that are happy to stand behind you. And that, it's amazing to see like how isolated, and I mean, let's be honest, this usually happens to women.
Yes.
How isolated women feel in these situations, and they end up coming and talking to me or like someone else here at Tatlif, like 6 months, a year, 2 years into some form of abuse. And at first it surprised me. I was like, why didn't you come to us when this first started happening? But that's part of the iniquity. Yep. That's part of it. Like you're almost made to feel like you're deserving of it in some way, or that you you have to deal with this on your own. Please know that there are people who will stand behind you, and as many people as you can get standing behind you. That keeps everyone honest. You know, I know that if I were to ever do wrong by my wife in a very serious way, I have a number of her cousins who would just pay me a visit. And not that is something that like is ever at the forefront of my mind, but like, you know, it shows me that like I don't just have to do right by her. I have to do right by her whole family. Okay. And you need to have a group of people that whoever, inshallah, that you end up with next, that person needs to be aware you have a whole lot of people that he has to do right by.
Heavily invested, you know, it's important, you know, for men and women, but especially for men, to know that, you know, and the tradition of the wali, right, the advocate, you know, traditionally it served that purpose, that, you know, this is not just, you know, a consensual agreement between two lovers, but rather there's a communal and a familial aspect here that must be acknowledged, respected, meaning like, you know, like I have, you know, 2 daughters, and I'm thinking everything that I put into trying to make sure that they have esteem, self-respect, dignity, love for their religion, and this is going to be destroyed by a tyrannical man, I can't let it happen. Will, pass that. I got to go get him. I got to go. I can't let this happen. I can't. We're not doing this. Everything I put into trying to make these women, these young women that I'm raising, you know, feel, you know, compelled by Islam and, you know, this feeling of being protected by this faith and by this community. And because you can't control yourself, that's going to be jeopardized. No, like I mean, he's Muslim. It's just gonna be in the leg, man. Just in the lower body. He's Muslim in the lower body. It's just to the lower body. He's Muslim, and I'm not kidding. You know, so it's a serious issue. You know, it's a serious issue. You know, but
please,
please,
to the person who asked that question, please consider us here at your service.
Bismillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربي رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم آمين يا رب العالمين.